Hey, what is up, YouTube? Kolst here, and I'm here with Twitch chat as well. Twitch chat can put their hi YouTubes into chat, but we're going to be talking about the new expansion, which is called, maybe I should have looked up the name before, but I think it's Festival of Legends, something like that. And they've revealed every single neutral card. So we're going to be talking about this. Chat can put in like Pepe stars to rate it. Like we'll kind of, a lot of people use like a 5-star rating system, so we'll kind of allude to that sometimes. But I'm just going to talk more generally about what these cards are, how good they are, if they're good or not, and you know which ones you want to be thinking about for Arena specifically. This will, of course, as always, be a more Arena focused review. So with that, I think we'll just start. We'll go. Sometimes I go like order of mana cost. Let's just start with the big cards. People like the big cards, right? Big cards are cool and all that. So let's just start with the big boy right here. This is Amplified Alec. This is the big neutral 10 drop, and it is a common, so you will be seeing it a lot. 10 mana, 6/12 with taunt. Death Rattle, deal 3 damage to all enemy minions. So as far as big cards go, this is probably about as good as they get, right? Like, I mean, even if this thing gets assassinated or whatever, it still casts a 3 damage AoE to the enemies, which, you know, if you're just trying to play a defensive deck that would actually want this, that's probably going to be useful. However, as mentioned in chat by Bradyology, yeah, if this gets silence removed or just silenced period, you lose, basically, right? So it has a very distinct weakness as far as that, but pretty much, you know, any big card is going to have that weakness. So it's one of those things where you in a slow deck, you would definitely take this, and you hope that, I guess, some of your other big taunts would get the removal out of the way, and then you play this and win, right? But it is very good for a big card, but those big weaknesses of having a big card are going to limit it greatly. I think overall I would say, like, it depends on your deck. In a slow deck, you might rate this even as high as like a 4-star maybe, but in an aggro deck, this is pretty much close to useless, like 1 to 2 stars. So on average, maybe 2.5, 3-star cards, something like that. You know, it'll very much depend. Moving on next to the next big card here, which is Mish Masher. This is an 8 mana 3/10 undead with rush. After this attacks, gain +1 attack and attack a random enemy minion. So this is very similar to a pre-existing card, which was printed a couple years ago. This is kind of like the new power crept version of Batterhead. This is 8 mana 3/12, which it had to actually kill a minion, and then it could attack again. It would act essentially, it's a big minion that acts as a board clear, kind of. But this didn't gain attack or anything. A lot of times it wouldn't be big enough to kill everything, but this is just going to, you know, have a lot more ability. Because what's important with this is that the first attack you target, right? So you just kill whatever it's able to kill, essentially. Yeah, assuming there's something that you can kill. But then, yeah, as asked, it will, from my understanding, it will just continue to attack, which means, for example, if there's just like, I don't know, a 4/12 on board, this will just keep hitting. It'll be a fight to the death, basically. If it's this thing against a 4/12, it'll just keep smacking it. And I think in that case, they both die, right? No, this will actually survive at 1 health in that case. So this actually just beats a 4/12. But yeah. So this is going to act as essentially a big board clear. It's always going to, if there's enough stuff on board, it'll always die, but it'll get a lot done. So compared to the other thing, you know, this really doesn't have that same vulnerability removal, because a lot of times it's just gonna, like, it's gonna be heavily damaged and it's just gonna get a lot done. So this seems very, very good. It has just so much better initiative and, you know, risk-free initiative compared to the Amplified Alec. This is gonna be the big card that you actually want to draft, probably. So this seems like a very, very solid card most of the time. But yeah, against like certain things, it might be an overpriced removal of a single target sometimes, but it's never going to be useless, right? So that makes it pretty good overall, I think. It's going to be a lot of value a lot of the time. Talking about a lot of value, let's move on to the next card here we have, which is Concert Promo Drake. 8 mana, 8/8 with tradable. Oh yeah, why did I think it survived at 1? Yeah, whatever. But anyway, I was thinking it was a 3/12 maybe, but anyway, Concert Promo Drake, 8/8 dragon with tradable. Finale, destroy an enemy minion. So let's talk about the finale keyword, because this will be the first time we're talking about it here. This is a bonus if it spends all of your remaining mana, which means you have to have 0 mana left as of playing this card. So, for example, you just played on 8/8, and you get the effect here, which is destroy an enemy minion. Important to note that it's not destroy a random enemy minion, it's just destroy a minion, so you get to target it. And the upside of tradable is that on something like this, you would never trade it really in the late game. You would just trade in the early game if it's just too early and you don't want your 8-drop yet, basically. So that's just a nice added bonus to it. But this is also just a very good late value card. Not like super crazy, you know, there's stronger things you can do than this, frankly, in the existing game, but it's just very solid, right? And Finale doesn't have too much of a downside. The big downside, as was mentioned in chat, is that on turn 9, you might not be able to do it, right? That's the big thing. But on turn 8, you can do it guaranteed unless you get dusted or something. But if you get dusted into your turn 9, you can do it. But on turn 10, you can always hero power, I guess, unless you're a demon hunter. That becomes a little awkward. But you can do it on 9, but then that might be really awkward in demon hunter. But in every other class, you can hero power to activate the finale. So it will work then. So you should usually be able to do it in every class, I guess, except demon hunter. Sorry, demon hunter. But yeah, generally, it's going to be a good card, and it's a common, so you're going to see it everywhere. And I don't think this is going to get like offering rate adjusted or anything either. Even though some people are going to ask for it to be. It might, I don't know. Because this is kind of the new Twin Tyrant. Like, it's very possible it does get offering rate adjusted, but we'll see. There are other cards that might be more likely to get offering rate adjusted. But with that, let's move on to another card here, which is the first legendary that they revealed. The One Amalgam Band. 7 mana 6/6 with all tribes, battle cry, gain a random bonus effect for each minion type you have played this game. So one thing that's worth noting, cannot be targeted is not actually an effect you can get. But you know, this is like, imagine, what was it called? The pool of things, you know, you can get like poisonous, taunt, divine shield, lifesteal, reborn. Yeah, this kind of stuff. And stealth as well. So you cannot be targeted, but you can get stealth. So you play this with 2 tribes, and you get the good old stealth taunt, right? For the ultimate upside. But yeah, anyway. So I mean, overall, like, you're gonna play this later on. It just doesn't seem like it's gonna be like a lot of stats, and maybe it has stealth, and you might not want it. Like, a lot of these things are not super useful, frankly. Like, lifesteal can be nice, reborn and divine shield can be nice, but it's not gonna be that crazy. Overall, this is probably like pickable, but as far as, there's just so many good legendaries at this point that you're probably just not going to want it. I guess you get like Rush Divine Shield. It's good, but you're just not that often that you're actually going to get that realistically. So you're going to be hoping for that probably, but you're just not going to get it a lot of the time. So yeah, honestly, as mentioned, I think you would just rather have Siamat most of the time. But, you know, it'll have its moments for sure. But you will see it off of Discover a lot. That's the big thing. You'll probably see this discovered more than you actually drafted. That's a good point. But with that, let's move on to another card, which is Unpopular Has Been, a 6 mana 5/5 Undead, which is an epic, so you will not see it super often. Especially now, neutral epics are pretty much as rare as legendaries, so you just don't see them very much. But this has Death Rattle, summon a random 5-cost minion from the past for some reason. I guess it's thematic, right? It does make thematic reasons, so I understand. But essentially, so this is like an inconsistent Cairn, basically. I mean, it really is, right? It's a 5/5, and it might give you something better than a 5/5. You could get an Earth Elemental, but you could also get like a 5 mana 2/2 or something. There's a serious chance that you just completely whiff, and then it's really bad. So yeah, like, you probably have to take it sometimes, but honestly, it's one of those cards you probably just, the downside's enough that you probably just wouldn't want to, and Cairn's not even that good nowadays anyway, frankly, so you'd probably just rather avoid it, but sometimes you're gonna have to take it just because it's the best card, you know? But yeah, you can get a Fel Reaver and stuff like that, that is true. There's like 8/8s that have massive downsides and stuff, which would be cool, but should actually be usually a high roll, but you know, we'll see. But overall, Yeah, it's like it's on average a good card, but you'd probably just prefer to take something else, frankly, most of the time. But with that, let's move on to Tony, King of Piracy. This is a 5-mana 4/6 pirate legendary with a very interesting effect, which is a aura. It's very important to note this is not a battle cry, this is an aura. That is, both players' decks are swapped. What that means is that, again, like, so once this is played, the decks are just swapped. So if this minion is killed, they swap it back. But also it has the additional text of Finale, which we'll mention again. This is a bonus if it spends all your remaining mana. So if you play this on turn 5, you get it. And if you spend all of your remaining mana to play if you play this when you have 5 mana, essentially, then you also get it. Then you draw a card. So then essentially you steal a card from your opponent's deck. So there are going to be certain, there's going to be like combos you can play like this with Fires of Zinashari and Steam Cleaner to just delete your opponent's entire deck, basically. But the thing is with this is that, you think about it, like a 5-mana 4/6 draw card is already good, right? It's not, that's pretty much like Big Ol' Whelp, probably slightly better than Big Ol' Whelp. Like, that's a solid card, not insanely good by modern Hearthstone standards, even in Arena, but it's fine, right? You can totally take this just for that. And as well, yeah, like, it has the added bonus that the higher wins you get to, the better this card gets, because your opponent's deck's going to be better than yours. So it's a totally pickable card in Arena as a result of that. It's still probably not a great legendary. They're just better legendaries. But yeah, it's totally fine and pickable just for, what it is. So without any like weird combos or whatever. And there's a small chance you can, do something weird to your opponent's deck too, maybe steal their dredge or something, right? Like there's a real chance it's better as well. So it's, yeah, a totally solid pickable card, but you're not gonna get memed too hard by it most of the time. With that, let's move on to Ghost Rider. This is a 5-mana 4/4 undead with Battle Cry. Discover a spell. Finale. Discover another. So the thing you have to note with this is that a 5-mana 4/4 discover a spell, you're giving up a lot of stats. That is a lot of stats to give up. Even like the mage card, which is, I should have pulled it up, but the 5-mana 6/4 discover, like, that's not an incredible card. It's definitely a good card, but it's not an incredible card right now. And this is giving up more stats, even though the attack maybe doesn't always matter. So there's a significant downside to that, which means you kind of do need to get the finale for it to be really worth it. But yeah, I mean, discovering 2 spells is insanely good. And it does depend on which class you're playing, but generally, like, pretty much every class has good spells now. So that's the one caveat to this, is that you really do need to get the finale off. And it means if you don't play it on turn 5 as well, you have to play the spell Discover at the end of your turn to actually get the finale again, which is awkward because a lot of times you want to discover a spell that you actually want to play immediately. So there is some downside to this. It does make the card a bit greedier than you might anticipate originally. And there are certain turns, like on turn 6, you might just not be able to do it. So there are some awkward things working against this card. Having said that, assuming you can make it work, it's very strong. So I think there are enough things working against it that it's going to be not a 5-star card, but it's going to be very good. And because people like to be greedy, everyone's gonna auto pick this every time. But it is a lot of the time going to make you vulnerable to tempo and stuff. So I think that's going to limit its pure power level, but it's a very good card. But with that, let's move on. Next one here is Pyrotechnician. 4-mana 2/5. After you cast a spell, add a random fire spell to your hand. So this will depend on rotation, obviously. Generally speaking, fire spells are really good. Like, there's some dead ones, but most of them are pretty darn good. So this, especially if you can pop off with this, and yeah, this is also a common. You can imagine this would have been like an epic a long time ago, but it's a common, so you're going to be seeing it a lot. But yeah, because it's a 4-mana 2/5, you do need to really have a plan with this. You know, you can't really get away with that. Just even getting one spell, it might not be worth it, right? But obviously the potential is there. If you have a bunch of spells, there's a lot you can do with this. And, you know, it's important to note that the fire spell you get off of it will trigger it as well. I do believe Hot Streak is going to be rotating out of standard. So if we're in a standard rotation, you're not going to be able to just like get Hot Streak, which would be absolutely insane off of this. And that's probably why they don't have the caveat that it has to be a not 0-mana spell. Maybe they remove it from the pool anyway. It's possible they still remove Hot Streak from the pool, because that's really unfair. But yeah, that's the other thing, is that similar to, you know, the 3-mana 1/4 in Mage currently, the Undead that casts Arcane Explosion every time you cast a spell. This is one of those things where if you don't kill this, you probably just lose, right? It doesn't protect itself innately like the Mage card does, so it's going to be harder to do, but yeah, it's one of those things where it's going to have its moments, but it's just not going to be insanely good all of the time. So it's a neutral worse Lyra. If anything, it's probably a better Lyra, honestly. I guess pre-spells are good, but if anything, I think it's better than Lyra, honestly. It is essentially just a neutral Lyra, though. Yeah. Anyway. So overall, probably a pretty solid card, though. So let's move on to this one here, which is Posic Audio Engineer. This is a interesting card. Legendary. 4-mana 5/4. Battle Cry. Add 2 3/3 bots to your opponent's hand. Death Rattle. Summon one of them for yourself. So this is a weird one, because obviously, you know, I should mention that the bots are 3-mana 3/3s. So under tempoed cards, but this essentially has to, it puts your opponent in this weird situation where they have to spend inefficient tempo to prevent you from getting 0-mana 3/3s. So they have to spend, you know, they have to spend 6 mana to counteract this. So this ends up being this weird kind of situation where what it really reminds me of is this card here, which is Commander Ulthok. This was a 5-mana 7/7, which if you just played it, it would lose you the game automatically. But if you played it while winning, it would be really useful, because your opponent just, it would lock them out of the game. And this is kind of the same idea. You want to play this while you're winning, and they just can't afford to play a bunch of 3-mana 3/3s. So in these type of decks where you're trying to push an advantage, it's just extremely useful, because in this best case scenario, you know, theoretically your opponent just has to use a board clear against you anyway. This is like a 4-mana 5/4 that partially forces the AoE, and then it gives you 2 3/3s afterwards. It's extremely high upside. It's just very hard to unlock, basically, because if you play this when in a value war, for example, you play a 4-mana 5/4 and you just give them 2 3-mana 3/3s that they just play, and then this thing is doing close to nothing, right? So it's a it's a very high potential but very situational card. So overall, in the right deck, it could be good, but it's just you'll usually have better choices in the legendary slot, basically, so you won't have to pick this probably. But in tempo decks, this could actually perform extremely well. So on curve, your opponent can't, it's weird because your opponent can't play both the bots even if they wanted to, because they don't have enough mana, but they also don't have to kill this immediately, and then they'll have time to play the bots. So that's why if you're not really heavily pressuring your opponent, it's not gonna work out well for you. You have to be pressuring. So for people that like to play passive, it's unpickable, but it could be good in tempo decks for sure. But with that, let's move on to Obsessive Fan. It's an interesting one. This has some combos with a couple of the other fan cards, particularly the 1-mana one, which we'll talk about much later. But it's a 4-mana 2/6 Battle Cry. Choose a minion. It has stealth while this is alive. So it's kind of like what that rogue card that used to give stealth. It's like a reprint of that kind of. But yeah, essentially you're not giving up that many stats for this, right? And there's a lot of things you can do with this. It does function similar to like a smaller herring, yes, but you know, one of the most basic uses of this, which you probably do the most often in Arena, is that you just, kind of like you could do with Herring too, you would just value trade something, and then maybe you're against a mage, and that would leave your guy at 1 health, and then you just play this. And then your opponent has to deal with this 2/6 before they can ping off your guy. And so what, are you going to force them to fireball your 2/6? That's going to feel terrible for them, right? So that's going to be like the most common thing you're going to be doing with this. Obviously, there's potential as well that, I mean, I don't know, you can put this onto Pyrotechnician to try to, you know, give this thing essentially, protect this with essentially spell taunt as well. But yeah. Oh, that's another thing too, is that you can actually stealth your opponent's taunts and things like that. That's also very relevant. So I hadn't actually thought about that, but yeah, you can also stealth your opponent's minions, which could be bad if they just start hitting you in the face. But yeah, to bypass a mountain bear or something like that, that would be potentially very useful too. So I hadn't even considered that. Overall, yeah, this seems like a very, very useful card. Probably not, you know, you definitely can't give this like a 5-star rating because it's just not that raw powerful. But this is one of those things that is just, there's so many things you can do with this that it's just always going to be useful pretty much. So I think this is going to be probably a pretty heavily underrated card. I think this will actually be pretty darn good. Yeah, it's common, so you'll see it a lot. So it seems like a very skill testing card, so I think this is like, sometimes I crap on Blizzard's card design, but this is a case where this is actually incredibly good card design for Arena, I think. We'll give him a little bit of a people clap, you know. This actually seems very, very good. But with that, let's move on. And also using a mechanic that some people call bad design, stealth, but actually making it good. Truly, truly excellent. But with that, let's move on to a card that will not compliment so much on card design. This is Merch Seller. 4 mana, 3/5, Naga, also a common. With aura effect, I guess you would say, at the end of your turn, put a random spell on the top of your opponent's deck. So making yourself lose fatigue, literally unplayable, Kappa. But, so the idea of this is that, you know, random spells, a lot of spells have synergy with classes that are not your opponent's class. It's a random spell, so it could be anything. You could give him Sunwell, which would give him, you know, that's the thing. But, and it's, the idea is it's worse than the card in their deck. But the thing is that in Arena, most of the time you're going to get something at least playable, and it's not going to be that much worse than an average card of your deck. And additionally, there's a chance you give him Sunwell or something and lose yourself the game automatically. So I still think on average, this is a positive effect, actually. Because I think it is still, with the power level Arena now, I actually do think an average spell is worse than a draw their deck. But you're probably just, this is on an understated body, it's a 4 mana 3/5, and it's probably just not worth it anyway. Even because if you're a good player, you still just don't want to introduce that level of variance into your deck. So I think you would just rather not, you know, so you just say like, no thank you. But people are going to play this, and it's going to give you Shield Slam when you're playing Priest or Hunter or whatever, and you can get mad about it. But yeah, you'd probably rather not most of the time. It's probably like, I would rate it like a 2-star card probably, which is unfortunately not unpickable. But talking about a card that is unpickable, Freebird. 4 mana 2/2 beast with charge. Epic rarity. Battlecry, gain +1/+1 for each other Freebird you've played this game. So obviously the idea of this is you're supposed to be playing some weird cute OTK deck with this, right? Where you just somehow discount and play a whole bunch of Freebirds out of your hand, right? That's the whole idea of this. There's like no way you can even remotely do this in Arena. It's completely unplayable. Because by the time you've played a 4 mana 2/2 and then a 4 mana 3/3, you've already died because you spent 8 mana doing close to nothing. So it's pretty darn garbage. It is good with Northshire Farmer though, yeah. That is potentially true, but you have to actually play them. It's not summon. Like, otherwise it would be a lot easier and even possible to do in Arena, maybe. But you have to actually play them, so it's just no. So that, we have ETC. This card isn't in Arena, so that's a very cool card, which I think most people are really familiar with anyway, because it's been pretty impactful and constructed. So let's not talk about it, because it's not in Arena, so we'll just move on. Next up we have is Cover Artist. 4 mana 3/3 Battlecry, transform into a 3/3 copy of a minion. So, I mean, this is a reprint of Faceless Manipulator. What do you want to say? The big difference is it's 1 mana cheaper, but because it's 1 mana cheaper, the loss is you don't get to copy the stats of what you're doing. Now, the problem in Arena is that the big point of playing Faceless Manipulator more often than not is that you want to actually steal the stats of a minion. So that makes it a little bit weird. You essentially, you know, you have to be getting a good death rattle or some kind of aura effect maybe, but realistically, you know, you need to hit like a Stoneborn General or something with this, in which case it can be good. But I guess in that sense, it's similar again to like, you know, Creepy Painting's similar as well. But yeah, there's gonna be like just very specific things that you can hit with this that could make it worth it, but in the average deck it's probably just a little bit too tricky to make work. Unless you have a whole bunch of death rattles that you think are going to stick, you're just probably not going to have it that often. But it's one of those things again where it'll just have its moments. But it's an epic, and you'll probably forget this card even exists realistically, because people aren't going to pick it that much. So yeah, it is what it is. Card you will not forget exists, however, though, is Candle Raiser. This is a 4 mana 3/3 Divine Shield, so basically a Silvermoon Guardian for the OGs, but also with Finale, give adjacent minions Divine Shield. So this is, yeah, very, very strong card, because this is a weird one because it's a Finale effect that, again, you actually just want to play this on curve if you have the ability to, and that makes it very strong. So if you're assuming that you're hitting this on like 1 or 2 cards, you could essentially, this is a card I would compare to Buffet Biggin. Hitting this thing is about as good probably as just playing a Buffet Biggin. So in a sense, it's like a neutral Buffet Biggin, but you have to actually be on board to trigger it, and you have to Finale it, which means you can't play it off curve. So that can make it potentially awkward. But in a deck that actually has, where you're actually able to play things to actually stick onto this, you probably have a pretty low curve, and you're probably going to be able to trigger that Finale without much problem either. And yeah, compared to Buffet Bacon, you don't have to do the whole infuse thing, which also helps. Which helps very much because, you know, it's funny because Buffet Bacon, sometimes you have to trade off the minion to get the infuse to work. And then this will just... But this, you just have the minions stay alive, and then they stay alive. So it's like, yeah, it's very, very strong is the point. The one thing is like, before I was like, when I first saw this, I was like starting to freak out about it. But then I realized it's like, you know, you do get Buffet Biggined, and then you just win anyway, right? Like, because it's just not that big of a swing anymore. In original more classic Arena, like this would end the game on the spot, but it probably just isn't strong enough to actually end the game on the spot most of the time. That's the funny thing. So it's just going to be a very annoying, very strong neutral card that we're just going to have to live with, basically. But it's going to be good in tempo decks, and I like playing tempo decks, so if anything, this probably helps me more than hurts me. So good luck, everybody else. Get wrecked. But yeah, it's very strong. So we will move on. Next up is Worgen Rowdy. 3 mana 3/4 Battlecry, summon a 0/3 instrument case for your opponent, break it for a random weapon. It's very interesting to me that they have this new theme of weapons in this set, which is like the instrument cards. And this does say it gives you an instrument case, but this doesn't just give you an instrument, it gives you a random weapon. So it can give you anything. Give you Doomhammer, it might give you like a legendary weapon or something even. Like the Hunter one. But yeah. So there's going to be a lot of variance in that. The thing is that, I mean, a 3 mana 3/4 is still fine in Arena, but honestly, it's getting to the point where a 3 mana 3/4 is a little bit slow. So this probably isn't that great just for that reason. You have to do additional work to actually trigger the weapon, which if you're off board is difficult. So this is going to be one of those things where in a slower deck, and also if you're kind of off board, you're taking damage, so you can't really use a lot of weapons anyway. So this is more of an aggressive deck type of card. A slower deck just really isn't going to be able to use it. No, it gives you the weapon, it doesn't give the opponent a weapon. That'd be hilarious. But yeah, so you kind of need to be a more aggressive deck to actually properly use this. So it is nice to get a weapon in a non-weapon class, so that gives it some advantage. But I think in a slower deck, this really just isn't going to be that good for you. But in an aggressive deck, it's going to be totally useful. You really just want to be able to actually have a board to actually pop the weapon as soon as possible, and without having to use resources to do it. But yeah, it's pretty good. Later on, you'd be able to just, you know, on turn 7, you just play this, pop a weapon, and then immediately play the weapon, which could be pretty nice. But yeah, I think it's, you know, it's like a pretty solid, decent card in most decks, but, you know, nothing to go home about. Next up we have here is Static Waveform. This is a 3-mana 5/6 elemental. At the start of each turn, lose 1 attack or health chosen randomly. So it does say each turn. So keep in mind, you play this as a 5/6. And then it immediately loses a stat. So it's a 4/6 or a 5. It's either a 4/6 or a 5/5. And then by the time it comes back to you, it'll have lost 2 stats. But the thing is that I think a lot of people are underrating this, because keep in mind, like, it comes back to you and it's still 2 stats above vanilla. Even once it's come back to you a second time, it's still vanilla, right? It might have an awkward stat distribution, possibly, but most of the time it's going to be somewhat close to, you know, like a 3/4 still. A 2/5, it might be a 2/5, it might be a 4/3. But it's usually going to still be fine, right? And by the time this thing has attacked, you know, at that point it already had an overstated turn, and it's probably, so essentially it's done its job already. So this essentially functions as a weird kind of overstated minion. It's a lot better than I think a lot of people give it credit for. It's going to function like an overstated minion for the most part. So I think it's going to be good. And that is true that you can just silence it, and then if it's like that's what's funny is if it's imagine it loses health 4 straight times, it would be a 5/2. But it would be a 5/2 at full health, and then you silence it away and it goes back to a 5/6. And no matter how much attack it's lost, it would silence and regain all of its attack. So you can silence it as well to get even more value. So this is a very good card, I think. This is at least a 4-star card. It might be the best. I think this is, compare this to like the 4 or 5 that you take 2 damage every turn. I think this is better than that, which that card is not insanely good anymore, but I think this is better. I think you would take this over that card. Yeah, you would take it over Bloody Knight, I think. But yeah, so this is good, but not crazy good. So anyway, next up we have Rowdy Fan. It's a 3-mana 1/5 Quillbore. The first Quillbore I think they've printed in like 2 years. With Battle Cry, choose a minion. It has +4 attack while this is alive. So there's a lot of weird things that could happen in like an actual board battle with this. A lot of the time, like, I mean, this is so much potential. Compare this to like Dark Iron Dwarf or Abusive Sergeant or something. It's like, it's way, it does too much, frankly, right? Like, it's way too good. I think it's way better than Dark Iron Dwarf, because first of all, I mean, you can just put this on a 1/1 and just trade it off, and then you get a Cold Blood, and then you just have 1/5 sticking around, which isn't insane, I guess, but there are things you can do with this. Put it on a taunt, you could stealth this, I guess, technically, but in general, like, it's just a 5 health minion on 3 is just hard to deal with. So your opponent might just have to deal with the minion rather than this thing. I don't believe it can buff itself. That would be kind of OP. But yeah, this just seems like it's just it's too many stats. It's, you know, it's 5/5 worth of stats for 3 mana. It does too much to not be good, basically. But it's probably not crazy. You do kind of need to be on board to make it work, right? So it's conditional, but it does seem good. You could chain them, yeah. That would actually be pretty insane if you chain them, because you put one onto another. On turn 6, you put one onto another minion, and then you chain it onto the other one. If you actually can protect them somehow, could be pretty cool. But yeah, I think it just does a bit too much for it to not be good. You know, it's a neutral common, you'll see it a lot. You're going to have to be thinking about this card, right? Not, you know, thinking about whether you want to play that 5/5 into your opponent's 1/1 because of this. So I do think it's a very solid card overall. Yeah, Priest will love it because they can play Bless. Is Bless rotating out though? I think it might be. But maybe it's not. Bless has been around for a while. Maybe it's not yet. But yeah, there's it's just solid because a 1/5 is annoying and it'll just, you know, it'll kill off little things and stuff. And the effect is solid, so I think it's pretty good. Because the point is like your opponent's not going to want to just remove a 1/5, you know, because it's not really super worth it, and sometimes they'll have to, but yeah. Oh god, yeah, you can play with Battlemaster too. Oh jeez. Yeah, like it'll be good, don't worry. Next up we have a very interesting card, Photographer Fizzle. Is a 3-mana 3/3 legendary battle cry. Take a snapshot of your current hand and shuffle it into your deck. This is going to be great with for greedy players because the snapshot is not, it doesn't just shuffle your hand into your deck. The snapshot is a 2-mana spell which adds the entire contents of your hand to your deck immediately. So, you know, essentially you would compare this to Elise, which added a pack from that whatever expansion it came out in. So, you know, you might get like, you know, I could add like just, I mean, however many cards, right? You can add too many cards than you even have room for, but it's a whole lot of potential value to do that. However, having said that, you know, you need to actually have a hand, which if you just play this on hand, if you play this on curve, you'll have a hand, right? So you could just rip this on curve. It's not that far off curve, and then it's, you know, you might get a snapshot, which is really good. But, you know, if you're playing tempo, if you're dumping your hand, you draw this late game, you might just not have a hand, and that just doesn't really do much, right? So overall, probably pretty good. There are better legendaries still, to put it bluntly. There's a lot of better legendaries still, but especially if you're playing a greedy deck that wants a little bit more greed, it's probably the best thing you could ever get, essentially. At least, assuming you actually are good at the game and draw the snapshot. Or you're a priest and you actually have ways to pull it out of your deck. Because priests specifically can directly pull it out of their deck at a lot higher consistency, so that could be really good for them. But, you know, a lot of times you're just not going to draw the snapshot and then it's useless, right? So, overall, like, there are better cards. It's probably going to be overrated a little bit. But how to work with temperate cards, I don't know actually. I bet you might get them. Shuffle a bunch of curses into your deck, that'd be funny. But yeah, I think overall it's gonna be a little bit overrated maybe, but like it'll have its moments, right? Be one of those things. Oh, with that, let's move on to Paparazzi. About this. So 3-mana 3/4. Battlecry, discover a legendary minion. Yeah, this is like a 6-star card probably. Well, the thing is that yeah, it's too good, to be honest. I think it was Alec already said that he expects this to get nerfed heavily, and I think I agree. Yeah, because the thing with this card is that so obviously a 3-mana 3/4 is fine. Discover is good. Discover a legendary is kind of broken. The thing that's going to get this card nerfed in offering rate is that all the good legendaries, most of them are actually neutrals. You know, Raid Boss Onyxia, Astalor, Alexstrasza, what other ones? Sylvanas, blah blah blah. Most classes, most of the good legendaries, well, really every class has less good class legendaries than neutral legendaries. So this is going to make people sick of it really fast because they're going to constantly lose to like Raid Boss Onyxia and stuff. So, and Astalor that are generated off of this specifically. So I think that is going to make this card kind of not okay, which is going to get it nerfed in offering rate very soon if they don't do it immediately. Because I think this will be the card that everyone complains about for that reason. Because it's just going to make you lose to neutral legendaries too much. And, you know, they've already nerfed most of the good neutral legendaries in offering rate. So that's going to kill this card probably. They'll probably, I would bet they don't ban it outright, but it's going to be probably epic or even legendary offering rate. So But yeah, I mean, it's a very, very strong card. It's not like the strongest card off of pure power level because you're not always going to hit the nuts, right? But you're going to hit the nuts very often. So that's going to get this card nerfed in offering rate, I think. But, you know, we'll see. Because it should absolutely be like at least epic or even legendary offering rate this card, just because it's going to be too... It's going to be too much, I think. Even going for the, okay, let's make everything crazy, it's still too much, I think. But with that, let's move on to the next card here, which is Outfit Tailor. 3 mana 2/2 Battle Cry. Give a friendly minion attack and health equal to this minion's. So the idea with this obviously would be that you hand buff it. A 3 mana 2/2 that gives a 2/2 buff, you would give a buff. That's not that good, to be honest. Like, it's fine, but it's not actually that good anymore. You know, it's fine. But you want to hand buff this. And if you do hand buff this, it gets really, really good really, really fast, right? And there are going to be neutral hand buffs, so that's going to be a thing you could potentially do. But without any of that, it's a fine card. It's still pickable, but you wouldn't be, you know, super excited about it, right? It is basically just a better Showered Sun Cleric, yes. But, you know, Showered Sun Cleric would be nearly unplayable now. This is a funny thing. But yeah, it's solid. Like, it's decent. It's like a maybe 3 to 3.5 star card by default. But if you have Synergy, it goes up to, you know, 4 to even 5. But by default, I think it's just fine. It's not great. That's fine. So with that, let's move on to the next card here, which is Metrognome. 3 mana 2/4 mech. After you play a 1-cost card, draw a 2-cost card, then increased. So this will, you know, in theory, the thing that's weird about this, you have to have a 1-cost card to combo with this, right? And then you would essentially tutor a bunch of stuff out of your deck, which would, you know, allow you to keep getting infinite value. What it really reminds me of, actually, is an old legendary card, which was Master Oakheart, which was functioned differently, but it would always pull minions out of your deck, like 1, 2, 3 cost, or 3 attacks, which was very good because at worst, right, it would pull bad things out of your deck, right? You can pull some of your early game that you didn't draw and get value out of it, essentially. And that's why this would be, I think, pretty nice, because you just get to pull out some of your cheaper crap out of your deck. The thing that's weird about this one, though, is that it does say 1-cost card, meaning, you know, you can play spells. But that can also be a downside, because imagine you're a priest, you play this on like 10 mana, hoping that or 9 mana, you would only need 9 mana, but you want to chain everything, and then you play this in a 1-cost, and then it pulls Shower Death, and there's no target for Shower Death, and then the chain gets broken. It could be awkward, too. Right, because it can pull spells. It's just a card, it's not minion. So it's going to be a little bit inconsistent, I think, because of that kind of thing. And it's a little bit awkward because, again, like, you actually need to have a 1-cost card to actually start the chain, period. And sometimes you're just not going to. So it's one of those things that it's just sometimes not going to work. But when it does work, it's going to be good. So, but it's not at the raw power level, I don't think, of an O card, because this, you know, you would pull out like a 6 mana 2/10 because it's a 2-attack minion. That would be the idea of this. So it's useful, but it's not super strong. But what would also be good is that you can also just play this on turn 4, and then your opponent has to kill it. So it has it's very flexible. There's a lot of things going for it. But it's just going to be bad sometimes, and it's going to be very good sometimes. It's very hard to gauge where the actual average would be, because it's going to be all over the place, is what it comes down to. So it's going to depend on your deck, because the biggest risk is just not having a 1-cost card to combo with it. So yeah, you can play it across multiple turns is the point. So you can just play this on turn 4, and then if you play this on turn 4, then on turn 5, you can play a 2 and then a 3 and keep chaining. So that might be actually one of the best uses of it, is playing it on turn 4 with a 1-drop. And that might actually be the best use of it. It probably is the best use of it, actually. So in that case, it seems very good. So overall, I think it's a good card. It's just that's going to be the big limiting factor, is that you need to actually have 1-cost cards, though. You know, and not every deck does. But if you have the 1-cost cards to set it up, you probably want to have a handful of 1-cost cards in your deck to make it consistent. But then it's good, I think. With that, let's move on to Festival Security. This is what the constructed players would like to call pack filler. 3 mana, 2/5, taunt, finale. Force all enemy minions to attack this. So a 3 mana 2/5 taunt is fine. The finale is going to be pretty useful. You don't have to trigger it if you don't want to later on, right? You can just play it as a 2/5 at the beginning of your turn, and then it's fine. But also on curve, you can just, you know, a lot of the times this is going to value trade whatever is on the board. So you just play this, and if your opponent has a 1/1 on board, whatever, it's dead. It just, this thing just effectively rushes it down, right? It might clean up multiple small minions, potentially, right? I would assume that it's enemy minions in attack play order, I guess. Should be a difficult thing to actually have to pay attention to, but yeah. It's kind of like essentially an anti-token card. So that you know, that'll be useful in Arena. Like, yeah, it's just like a solid early game card. If you want to be able to combat early game decks that like to go super wide really early, this is a great card, right? But and it's never gonna be bad because a 3 mana 2/5 taunt is like totally fine. So just a solid card overall. So yeah, it probably, you could probably compare it a lot to like Tar Creeper. The one thing that it because of its finale, it could be a little awkward. You can't really just, sometimes you're not always going to be able to, so there are going to be times on curve that if you're trying to use it like a Tar Creeper, you wouldn't actually want to use the finale, which could be a little bit awkward, but I think more often than not, it'll be fine, right? Because it's only really a problem on curve, which is a problem for a 3-drop, that you have a finale that you don't always necessarily want to trigger. That can be awkward, but yeah, and that's true. Like, shamans are going to be weeping in the corner in shaking in fear of this card. But yeah, I think it's, you know, more often than not, it's gonna be good. It's fine, right? There are better cards, but it's like a 3-drop that you won't hate taking. Next up, you have here, which is Cowbell Soloist, a 3 mana 4/2 battle cry. If you control no other minions, deal 2 damage. So these are a theme of cards they're having this expansion, the Soloist cards that require you to control no other minions when you play it to get an effect. This one, though, it's a 3 mana 4/2, and its upside is deal 2 damage. Yeah, honestly, it's kind of funny because I guess this is combating power creep. Like, this just doesn't, even if this didn't have the Soloist effect, like, this wouldn't even be that good of a card, frankly, you know, by modern standards. Like, with no text, with no condition, this would still just be like a 4-star card, probably. The fact that it has a condition makes it so much worse. So, yeah, I'm not sure. Like, it's just, you know, it's going to be one of those annoying cards, because if you're keeping your opponent off board, you get kind of punished. But yeah, like, I mean, for me, like, I don't, this is a hard condition for me to meet, because I play on curve, so I'm probably never going to take this. If you're a temple player, this is probably pretty much unpickable. If you're a slower player who tends to play off board all the time, then it's playable, right? It's still decent. It's decent, I guess, but, you know, it just seems weak, you know, so it is what it is. Next up, we have here, this is Stereot Totem, a 2 mana 0/3 totem. At the end of your turn, give a random minion in your hand +2/+2. So, this is kind of, I mean, this is kind of like a weird reprint of Prospector's Caravan, right? It's very similar. It doesn't have an attack stat itself, and it doesn't AoE buff, but, you know, you're getting a hand buff for the cost of this card. It's very annoying, because, I mean, the thing with this one is that if you just play this later on, I mean, it might still do more than a 2-drop later on, honestly, but, I mean, it's gonna die all the time, right? And it's just not gonna really be worth it. But what 2-drop is really worth it late game, right? Not very many. So it's still kind of okay, but what you really want to do with this is you just coin it out, and then your opponent just gets kicked, right? Like, that's what you really want with this. Kind of the same way that you would with a caravan. So, yeah, this is going to be one of those really annoying things, you know? Yeah, especially if it buffs the 2-mana taunt in your hand, and then you protect it with a 2-mana taunt, you actually win the game on the spot. If they don't have removal for it directly, right? And then even then they had to use removal on this card that already got value. So, I hate it, to be honest. It's a common too, so... it's probably gonna be underrated because... It's a little bit too good, frankly. Like, it just... Even in the worst case scenario where it dies for free, it's just not that bad. And it has the potential to win you the game by itself, pretty much. If this thing gets 2, 3, 4 buffs, you kind of just win, you know? So it's a little too good, basically, honestly. So it's gonna be terrifying. It's gonna, I guess I should like it too, because it punishes greedy players, right? So I like it. But yeah, and it's in any class, so yeah. It honestly just seems good. So, yeah. Next up, we have Rolling Stone. 2-mana 2/2 elemental with Rush. Battle Cry. The last card you played cost 1, gain +1/+1. So, very good on curve, potentially, right? If you actually have a 1-drop, and then you play this, you get a 2-mana 3/3, which, you know, very often your opponent, if you play a 1-drop, your opponent either plays a 2 on curve if you went second, or they coin a 2 to eat your 1-drop, and then you just eat it, right? You eat their 2-drop, because almost everyone plays 2-mana 2/3s now, so the potential of this is to eat a 2-drop with it, right? And then you're just kind of winning. Having said that, it has that condition which for a lot of decks is difficult. If you just don't have a 1-drop, it just doesn't really work. And later on, it's a little hard to meet this condition. But I guess you can do it on turn 3, for example, if you just happen to have a 1-drop that you didn't play earlier on. So you can just do it later. But it's a little, you know, some decks just can't meet this condition. But I guess because it's just the last card you played, it's not like you had to have played it last turn or anything, right? You can just combo it on the same turn. Makes it pretty solid a lot of the time, right? You do pretty much need to be able to trigger this condition, because a 2-mana 2/2 rush really isn't cutting it anymore, I think. But yeah, I mean, if you get this off, it's really good. So overall, but 2-mana 3/3 rush isn't insane, even. But like, particularly early on, getting to eat a 2-drop, that's where it's gonna be pretty devastating, right? So probably one of those things where you would like it. Essentially, you need to be a tempo player with 1-decks to really, with 1-drops to really appreciate this card, I think. But it's not always going to be good, that's the thing, because it's just, sometimes it's just not going to trigger it. You're just not going to be able to meet this condition, and then it's just not worth it. So it's going to be mixed, essentially. But yeah, it's going to be, that probably puts it somewhere between like maybe like a 3 to 4 star card. Probably on the lower end of that, 3 to 3.5. But it's going to be crushing sometimes. Like a Rolling Stone. Haha. Overall pretty good. Probably. Good in the decks I like to play anyway, so I guess I'll like it. Next up, we have Party Animal. 2-mana 2/3 Beast, Battle Cry. Give +1/+1 to a minion of each type in your hand. So, I mean, it's a 2-mana 2/3, what do you want to say? And getting a bunch of hand buffs for free, basically. Pretty good, right? You're pretty often, like, especially if you play this early on, like, you're going to have like 4 cards in hand, 2 of them will be minions, at least 1 of them will be tribes, right? But sometimes, like, you might have 2, it's not going to be that uncommon that you get 2 or 3 hits off of this, and then it's just kind of unfair, right? It's like less value than Bannerman, but in that case, it's like, you know, going to be like close to the, it's about as much tempo value as Bannerman without as much of a cost as from playing a 3-mana 2/2, right? So it's going to be, yeah, decent. And there's the potential, yeah. That's the other thing, is that if you stack these, if you have multiple party animals and you happen to have multiple tribes in hand, this could get really out of hand, basically. And yeah, like most minions have tribe, right? Like you don't tend to have that many different types of tribe in your hand at any given time, but like, you know, this doesn't need to do that much, and it's just sometimes, occasionally it's going to do way too much, but most of the time it's just going to be good, right? So overall, I mean, this is going to be one of the better neutrals of the set, I think. So yeah, it's usually going to do too much. It's just one of the better 2-drops. I guess one of the better 2-drops they've ever made. It's just very, very good. No downside. Other than just not being broken in other ways, but very solid. Next up we have here, this is Instrument Tech. 2 mana 1/2 Battle Cry. Draw a weapon. So obviously you need to have a weapon. That makes it bad in a lot of decks. However, they did mention very explicitly that every class is going to have a weapon. Every class is going to have one of these types of cards, which is a, you know, these are like a the instrument weapons. Every class will have a weapon, but some of them are low rarity, I believe. Like these are the 2 they've revealed. This is the Rogue one and the Demon Hunter one, which happen to be weapon classes. But every class will have a weapon, so you might be able to use this. But you know, it's very risky to even pick this if you only have one weapon. So realistically, you're not going to want to take this pretty much ever unless you're a weapon class anyway. The power of this is in constructed that, you know, the reason it has such bad stats, I think largely is because you can actually tutor out a particular weapon if you really, you know, want to build your deck around a particular card. So you can guarantee that you draw it, right? In Arena, that's just not a thing. So overall, I mean, it's just one of those things where, yeah, okay, this is a pre-nerf novice engineer in weapon classes, which is good. Like, that's good. That's fine, right? It gives a good card that you probably want to have. Even though that's a little bit weak by modern standards, but I mean, it's still fine. But obviously, it's worthless in a lot of decks in certain classes that don't have a ton of weapons. So most classes, you just aren't going to take it, but you know, if you're Warrior, Demon Hunter, Death Knight with weapons, you would be pretty happy to take this a lot of the time, but still not going to be that crazy because you're not actually directly setting up a combo with it. But it would be okay. What's more than okay though, moving on to Hipster. 2 mana 1/3 Battle Cry. Discover a spell from your opponent's class that isn't in your deck. Isn't in their deck. So from what I understand, this says, you know, compare this. This is obviously a reprint of Pandaren and Porter. But this is that didn't start in your deck. But this is that isn't in their deck. So by that wording, it heavily implies that it just needs to not be in their deck, which means your opponent could have flame struck you and then you still get flame struck off of this, right? The thing that's awkward about it though is that, you know, if it was that didn't start in their deck, you would get better information from it that would be more helpful. The problem is that you play this whenever and you see a flame strike, so you think they don't have flame strike, but then you just don't know that they already drew their flame strike. The flame strike is in their hand, you play into flame strike, and then you get fucking obliterated. That would be, you know, that would be the problem. But you know, so it has, that's the drawback, but you do get a lot of information about what, you know, they probably have or don't have, but you get baited by this. But regardless, like, I mean, a 2 mana 1/3 discover a spell from your opponent's class, because it's discover, you're probably not going to get 3 useless cards, right? And spells are good, you get to do things that you wouldn't be able to do because you're not their class a lot of the time. Unless, I guess if it's a mirror, then it's just discovered from your class. The one thing, and because it's Arena too, like, I mean, obviously you can't get things that they picked, but people don't always have all the good cards. It's going to be way better in Arena than in Constructed, for example, because in Constructed, that means you're just not getting all the good spells. So it's This card seems, it's weird because this card is probably like completely hopelessly unplayable and constructed. But yeah, it's going to be good in Arena because you can get some of, against Mage for example, you can get some of the things that they just were not fortunate enough to draft, right? You cannot get hero cards because they're not spells. So yeah, I mean, it's basically is just an Arena card, and yeah, I mean, it'll be good. You'll pick this a lot. It's a good card. So for that, we'll move on to Audio Medic. This is a 2-mana 2/3 rush with Finale, gain lifesteal. So yeah, you can't always Finale with this, which makes it a little bit awkward. But I mean, it's a 2-mana 2/3 rush, which is, you know, fine, right? And a rush isn't always going to matter on curve, but it's never going to be bad, right? So it's a fine 2-drop. Sometimes you'll get to just eat a 1-drop on curve, which makes it better. But then, and sometimes you'll get lifesteal, which is also nice. Getting a 2/3. I mean, unless you buff this a bunch, getting 2 lifesteal, even if this sticks a little bit, and it's probably not going to be super huge. But I mean, you know, it's never going to be bad. It's just a totally solid 2-drop. Which is relevant in the late game because at least it's a rush, so at least it can kill something that you have to do, right? So it's good. And yeah, anything with lifesteal, like, it has the upside that's going to be harder to ignore if you're doing that. But yeah, you get Finale again if you spend all of your remaining mana. So that's the thing, is like, if you have 8 mana, you have to have exactly 6 mana before you play this to actually get the lifesteal. So you can't always get it, but you know, any of these 2-drops that have relevance in the late game for any reason, essentially, are just going to be better than other 2-drops. So this is going to be a good 2-drop. You're going to be pretty happy to have. You're not going to pick it over premium cards, but it's just good, right? So it's solid. Next up, we have Audio Amplifier. This is a 2-mana 2/3 mech with Battle Cry. Set your maximum mana and can size to 11. So I'm usually talking about Arena, but I should mention the teaser of this card, which is, and you thought we were putting Wild Heart Guff in core. We'd never do that. Wink, wink. We'll just acknowledge that and move on. But anyway, Battle Cry. So what's interesting about this one? This is not just like +1 mana, and it does not give you a mana crystal or anything like that, right? But it's a one-time thing. So having multiple of these doesn't do anything. You can only go up to 11. And in Arena, I mean, I guess sometimes you do actually max out your hand. So that can be relevant sometimes. But, you know, realistically, usually it's not that relevant. And this isn't that relevant either, like going up to 11. Obviously, most games are over by that point. But, you know, sometimes you have like an 11-mana combo that you wish you could play or wish you had coin for. But then this could enable something, right? It has potential to matter, but a lot of times it's just not going to matter, right? It's a 2-mana 2/3. It's a mech, so it has some synergies in certain classes, and you'll pretty much... It's slightly better than a 2/3, but it's mostly just a 2-mana 2/3, so you wouldn't want to prioritize it too highly most of the time. But anyway, that is it. You wouldn't want to get baited into valuing it super highly, expecting it to do anything, because it will sometimes, but it's usually not. Next up, though, we have Frequency Oscillator. This is a 1-mana 2/1 mech Battle Cry. The next mech you play costs 1 less. So if you have enough mechs, it's a 0-mana 2/1, right? Kind of nice. You can mana cheat out effectively a mech if you have something big that you want to do. I don't know exactly what's in the mech pool you really want to do that with. I mean, if you have like a Goliath or something, obviously there's some potential. So anything that does that is nice. The thing is that, I mean, you probably wouldn't have that much hope for this really doing that much, and then it's essentially just a low impact card, because a lot of times you're just not going to have. The other thing you can do with this, I guess we don't know if it's going to rotate out of core, but like, I mean, Gorillabot, for example, you can just play this and then curve right into Gorillabot. So there's a lot of things you can do. Yeah. It's just, you probably, and it's just like, you know, the fact that it gives you that mana ramp, if you have combos for it, it's a very good one drop essentially, right? But so a lot of decks just aren't going to value this super highly, and it's just a little low impact, right? So if you have a lot of things for it, it's good, but in the average deck, it's probably just not doing enough for you, you know, realistically. But it's fine, you know. If you want a one drop and you have any hope of this doing anything, it's the next one you play. It's not this turn or anything, right? So you can store it for the whole game. So it's good, but you know, it's still just a one drop, so. Next up we have here is Crowd Surfer. 1 mana, 1/1 Murloc. Epic tag. Death Rattle. Give any other minion +1/+1 and this Death Rattle. Yeah, it's a meme card and not a particularly good meme card. Should we just move on? The thing is that, you know, there's the big risk that it can just buff your opponent's minion and then you're getting wrecked, right? As long as you have more minions than your opponent, you can theoretically actually expect it to usually not screw you, but it might screw you is the problem. So that's the big issue here. This is the perfect time for Green Goat to come in with the raid. We're talking about Crowd Surfer. Welcome, welcome. If you don't know Green Goat, check them out. They have a great podcast where I believe they talked about all these neutral cards as well. We're kind of wrapping up here. But yeah, I guess you could ping this. You could like ping this to trigger. At that point, it's just not worth it, right? Like there's too much like potential for this to do it. Like it's just not worth this card. I don't think it's just worth it. It's just not, because it's a death rattle, not a battle cry. Your opponent, that means if you just play it, your opponent has full control over it. Like it's just not, it's not worth it. Is the point. So with that, we will move on to Annoying Fan. This is a 1 mana 1/2 mech. Battle Cry. Choose a minion can't attack while this is alive. So, I mean, this is like a reprint of what? Glacial Shard, essentially. It's weird though because it's higher risk, higher reward, right? You could theoretically use the 4-drop to stealth this and be really, really annoying if you wanted to. But the issue though is that, you know, this isn't a guaranteed freeze. Your opponent could just kill this and then it doesn't do anything, right? Because then then this is gone and then that thing can still attack immediately. So it's gonna do nothing. But it's nice that like on curve, you know, if your opponent has a 2/3 that would have just eaten this, you can at least get the 1/2 out of the board, right? So all of that makes it so, you know, you just wouldn't expect it to like stick around. It's probably just not gonna do that much. But there is potentially you hand buff it. You can play a taunt to protect this. That it will have its moments, right? You would kind of value this as just a 1-drop. You want to have like taunts and just other minions to just protect this and just make it so your opponent actually maybe has to use like a rush or removal on it that they just wouldn't have wanted to use, right? And then it just does something to just force a resource your opponent didn't want to use, but you just wouldn't have like super high hopes of this like perma-freezing a super large minion. It's just like essentially just a good 1-drop that a tempo deck might just throw out there to be annoying. And with that, let's move on to the last card here, which is Air Guitarist. A 1 mana 1/1 battle cry. Give your weapon +1 durability. So again, every class does potentially have weapons because of the instruments, so it's not 100% unpickable in every class, even the non-typical weapon classes. However, I mean, you can compare this to like Upgrade. Upgrade wasn't even that good, frankly, and like maybe this a 1/1 and a +1 durability a lot of the time is going to be better than an Upgrade, right? But a lot of times you would actually not even upgrade with Upgrade. You would actually just get a 1/3 weapon. You can't even do that with this, right? So I think the idea of this card is that you're really supposed to have these instrument cards and you're supposed to be powering up with these and doing something very specific combo oriented thing in constructed with it, and that's just not what you're doing with this card. So, you know, in a class with really good weapons particularly, I mean, even like a lot of the smaller weapons aren't going to really make this worth it either. So you probably need to be like warrior and have like some of the 4 attack weapons and stuff to really make this worth it. Otherwise, it's probably just not gonna be worth it. So, in most classes, unpickable, almost always. Oh, this looks a lot like Rhea Ripley from WWE. I think. I just realized. But yeah, in most classes, just not even playable, because you definitely wouldn't use this just to like hit a rogue dagger or something. Yeah. Because you need like a good weapon to even make this worth it, and you're just not going to have that all that often. But yeah, that is it for this card reveal. Let me know in the comment section which card you that would be the most fun to play with, which one you are most afraid of, and why it is, as we are in agreement with Gritting Goat since they just came in. Paparazzi, why it is Paparazzi. But do you think this card will get its offering rate adjusted or not? And how quickly do you think it will? It's we're going to have to find out, I guess. Maybe they'll do it on release, maybe not. I do think it'll happen, though, as well. But anyway, appreciate everyone hanging out here on Twitch and on YouTube as well. Appreciate it, of course. As always, this was the first 35 neutral cards. We will have more reveals. I might just wait until they start revealing full classes before I actually do them. I don't know, maybe I'll do it. I think I'll do it that way, because honestly, like, I don't feel like just tracking all the reveals super closely. I don't feel like there's that much value in it anyways, so we'll see. But anyway, stay tuned on the YouTube for that. Thanks a lot for hanging out, everyone. We'll see you guys in the next one.